Hello everyone, wishing you all good health and peace in life. Life's cruelest tests often come when we are least prepared. For Huyen, the walls of the hospital became both a place of hope and unbearable fear. Maya's small body grew weaker with each passing hour, her fragile breaths echoing louder than any storm. The doctor's words cut through Huyen's heart. Her daughter's condition had worsened. Tears streamed endlessly as she clutched the medical bills in her trembling hands. The weight of poverty pressed down on her until she could no longer stand. She collapsed in despair, her cries filling the sterile, white halls. How could a mother save her child when love was not enough to pay the price of survival? Beside her stood D, his face pale but his eyes unwavering. The burden now rested on his shoulders. Could he bear it all, protect both Huyen and Maya, and carry them through this storm? In that critical moment, the strength of one man's love would decide whether despair swallowed them whole or hope still had a chance to bloom. The night air outside the hospital was heavy, but inside the small ward, it felt even heavier. Machines beeped in uneven rhythms. Nurses hurried past, and in the corner of the room, a young mother clutched her child's hand as if her life depended on it. Maya's small body trembled with fever, her breath shallow, her skin pale. Only hours earlier she had seemed better, smiling faintly when Dee fed her porridge. But now the fever had returned with frightening force, dragging her into a state of weakness that left both Huyen and Dee terrified. Huyen, let the doctors work, Dee whispered, his voice calm but his heart pounding. But Huyen's tears were unstoppable. She bent over her daughter, pressing trembling kisses on her damp forehead. Please, my child, please don't leave me. I can't lose you. Her sobs filled the room, raw and desperate. When the doctor spoke of urgent treatment and new medicines, the weight of reality struck like thunder. Hospital fees, numbers that seemed impossible for Huyen, who had already borrowed and sacrificed everything. She sank to the floor, covering her face with both hands. I have nothing left, nothing. How will I save my child? Dee knelt beside her, his rough hands gently pulling hers away. His eyes were steady, though shadows of worry lined his face. Don't cry, Huyen. I'll take care of it. I'll find the money. Just stay strong for Maya. She shook her head wildly. Dee, you've already done too much. You can't carry all of this. But Dee's voice did not waver. I can. I will. Because you and Maya are my family. He rose, leaving the room in urgent steps. Outside, the night rain poured, drenching him as he ran toward a friend who might lend him enough, toward neighbors, toward anyone willing to help. Pride no longer mattered, only Maya's life did. Back inside, Huyen sat by her daughter's side, her body trembling from exhaustion and fear. She whispered to Maya, who lay unconscious, "Your uncle is out there fighting for you, my love. Please hold on. Please stay with me." Hours passed before Dee returned, soaked to the bone, but with money clutched tightly in his hands. He handed it to the nurse without hesitation. Do whatever it takes. Save her. The treatment began immediately. Huyen grasped Dee's arm, her tears streaming anew not only from fear, but from something deeper. Gratitude, love, and the overwhelming knowledge that this man, though burdened and weary, had chosen to carry them through the storm. And so, in that fragile night, with machines humming and prayers whispered, Huyen leaned against Dee's shoulder, broken but not alone. Whether tomorrow brought light or shadow, she knew one truth: Dee would not let go. Dee returned with a bowl of porridge in his hands, his face pale but calm. He placed it on the small table beside the bed and looked at Huyen, who was still trembling. Huyen, he said gently, eat something. You need strength. Maya needs you strong. But Huyen shook her head, tears still spilling down her cheeks. How can I eat? How can I even breathe when I don't know if I can save her? Her voice broke, echoing her despair. Sat beside her, his hand finding hers, rough and warm. We will find a way, he whispered firmly. Do not lose hope. Maya is still fighting, and so are we. I will not let you face this alone. At that moment, Maya stirred weakly. Her small hand reached out, brushing Huyen's sleeve. Mama, her fragile voice trembled. Don't cry. I will be okay. Huyen bent over her, kissing her daughter's damp forehead, sobbing softly. My sweet girl, forgive me. Forgive Mama for being so helpless. Leaned closer, his voice steady, though his heart ached. You are not helpless, Huyen. You are the reason Maya keeps holding on. And he paused, his eyes burning with unspoken truth. I will carry whatever weight comes. Hospital fees, medicine, work, whatever it takes. Let me handle it. For the first time that day, Huyen looked up at him fully. His eyes were tired, his shirt damp with sweat, but there was no fear in him. Only love, a deep, unwavering love that wrapped around her like a shield. Her lips trembled, her heart breaking under the weight of gratitude. Why do you keep giving so much? He answered simply, with no hesitation. Because you and Maya are my life, and life is not meant to be abandoned in its darkest hour. The night outside grew darker, but inside the small hospital room, the dim yellow light flickered against the walls. Huyen sat by Maya's side, holding her daughter's fragile hand, afraid to let go even for a second. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her body heavy with exhaustion. Stood by the window, staring out at the endless shadows of the city. His mind was racing, thinking about where to find money, whom to ask, what more he could sacrifice. But when he turned back to see Huyen bent over Maya, whispering lullabies through her tears, something in him hardened. He would not fail them. Suddenly, Maya stirred again, her small voice weak but clear. Mama, I want to go home. I miss Baby and the guava tree. Huyen's chest tightened, tears rushing once more. Yes, my love, we will go home. Just be strong a little longer. Stepped closer, kneeling beside Maya. Little one, he said softly, Baby is waiting for you, and when you are well, I will take you to see the fish tank again. Remember how much you loved it. A faint smile touched Maya's lips, and she nodded weakly before drifting back into sleep. Huyen covered her mouth with her hand, trying to stifle the sob rising in her throat. Gently pulled her close, letting her rest her head against his chest. She resisted for a moment, then surrendered, her tears soaking into his shirt. I can't lose her, she whispered, her voice breaking. I can't. You won't, he replied, his voice low but steady. I promise you, Huyen, I will find the money. I will sell everything if I must. Just hold on to hope. That's all I ask. In that fragile moment, wrapped in despair yet anchored by love, Huyen realized that she was not alone. Even as the storm of hardship raged around them, Dee's quiet strength was the light that refused to go out. The following morning, the doctor came with heavy news. Maya's condition required immediate treatment, and the fees had to be paid in advance. Huyen's face went pale, her lips trembling as she clutched the paper in her hands. Her knees weakened. and she nearly collapsed, whispering, "How can we ever manage this?" Dee caught her before she fell. He took the paper from her hands, his jaw tightening as he scanned the amount. For a moment, his chest felt crushed, but he forced himself to breathe steadily. "Huyen," he said quietly, "don't let this break you. Stay here with Maya. I will handle it." Huyen shook her head desperately, grabbing his sleeve. "But, Dee, it's impossible. We don't have anything left." He gently touched her hand, his eyes filled with calm determination. "I still have my hands. I still have my strength. As long as I can work, nothing is impossible." Without another word, Dee left the room. His steps were heavy, but his heart carried a fire that refused to be extinguished. He went from door to door, asking old friends, distant neighbors, anyone who might offer even a small loan. Some turned him away, others gave what little they could, moved by the sincerity in his voice. By evening, Dee returned, sweat dripping from his forehead, his clothes dusty, his eyes red from exhaustion. In his calloused hands was a bundle of crumpled bills, the result of his relentless search. He placed it in front of the nurse with a trembling breath. "Please, save the child." When he walked back into the room, Huyen looked at him in shock, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Dee, how did you?" Dee only smiled faintly, his body swaying from fatigue. "Don't ask. Just know that Maya will get her treatment. That is enough." At that moment, Huyen realized the depth of his love. It was not grand words or empty promises, but silent sacrifices, paid with sweat and blood, that proved how much he truly cared. She reached for his hand, pressing it tightly against her heart, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Dee, thank you. You saved us." And in the quiet of that fragile night, while machines hummed and Maya slept under fragile light, Huyen's tears no longer fell from despair but from a deep, aching gratitude. The next days blurred into long hours of waiting, prayers, and restless nights. Doctors worked tirelessly, nurses came and went, and Maya, though weak, began to respond to the treatment. Her breathing steadied, her fever broke little by little, and color slowly returned to her pale cheeks. Huyen rarely left her daughter's side. She whispered songs, wiped away sweat, and kissed her forehead again and again. Yet behind her eyes, the shadow of fear remained, for she knew how close she had come to losing her child. Dee, meanwhile, became a silent guardian. He bought meals, washed clothes at the hospital sink, and even slept on the cold floor outside Maya's room. His back ached, his legs trembled from running everywhere to gather money, and sometimes, when no one was watching, he pressed his hand against his chest to ease the pain that throbbed there. But he never let Huyen see it. One night, when Maya finally fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, Huyen stepped out of the room to find Dee sitting on a wooden bench in the corridor. His head leaned against the wall, his eyes half closed from exhaustion. In the dim hospital light, he looked older, worn, almost fragile. "Dee," she whispered, kneeling beside him, "you haven't eaten properly in days. You're hurting yourself." He opened his eyes slowly, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine. As long as Maya is safe, nothing else matters." Tears filled Huyen's eyes. She touched his hand gently, noticing how cold and rough it was. "Why do you keep hiding your pain? Why won't you let me carry some of the burden?" For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Dee spoke softly, his voice hoarse. "Because I know your heart is already heavy with Maya. If I can take just a little of that weight away from you, then it's worth it." Even if it breaks me. Huyen's breath caught. She wanted to speak, to tell him how much his presence meant, how deeply his love had touched her. But words failed, and instead, she leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder.